5 years had passed since Sarah first stepped off that train in Cedar Ridge, and the Hartwell Ranch had become a place of abundance and laughter. What started as a marriage of convenience had blossomed into a true love story, built on the foundation of shared struggles, mutual respect, and the daily choice to put family first. Lucy was now 10 years old, a bright and confident girl who had grown into her role as big sister with remarkable grace. She helped Sarah with baby Daniel, who was now a rambunctious 5-year-old with his father's adventurous spirit and his mother's gentle heart. The family had also welcomed 2 more children. 3-year-old Emma, named after Sarah's sister who had finally recovered from her illness and married a banker in Denver, and baby Rebecca, just 8 months old. The ranch had prospered under their joint management. Sarah's suggestions about expanding the garden and increasing the chicken flock had proven wise, providing extra income that allowed Thomas to purchase more cattle and improve their breeding program. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Thomas and the neighbor men adding 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen where Sarah could manage the cooking for harvest crews and neighborhood gatherings. Sarah had also become an integral part of the Cedar Ridge community. She organized church socials, helped establish a lending library, and tutored children who struggled with reading. Her quiet competence and generous nature had won over even the most skeptical neighbors who had initially wondered about the replacement bride from Denver. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation had been in Thomas himself. The grieving widower who had married Sarah out of necessity had become a man who courted his wife daily with small gestures of affection. He brought her wildflowers from the pastures, surprised her with new books ordered from back east, and often found excuses to touch her hand or brush a strand of hair from her face. Their marriage had evolved from careful politeness to genuine partnership to deep, abiding love. It hadn't happened quickly or dramatically, but rather had grown slowly and steadily like the oak tree Thomas had planted outside their bedroom window the year Daniel was born. One particular spring morning brought an unexpected visitor that would test everything they had built together. Sarah was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, baby Rebecca napping in her basket nearby, when she heard horses approaching. Lucy and Daniel were playing in the garden, and Thomas was in the far pasture with the cattle. An elegant carriage pulled up to the front of the house, and Sarah's heart nearly stopped when she recognized the woman who stepped out. It was Catherine Morrison, Mary's younger sister, who had moved to San Francisco after Mary's death and hadn't been heard from since. Catherine was every bit as beautiful as her sister had been, with the same golden hair and delicate features that Lucy had inherited. She was dressed in the latest fashion, clearly prosperous in her new life in California. But there was something hard in her expression that Mary had never possessed. "Hello, Sarah," Catherine said coolly as Sarah approached the front porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "I hope you don't mind my unexpected visit." "Of course not," Sarah replied, though her instincts told her this visit was not a social call. "Thomas is out in the pasture, but he should be back for lunch soon. Please, come inside." As they entered the house, Catherine looked around with obvious surprise. The home was clean and comfortable, filled with children's toys and the evidence of a busy, happy family. Photographs of all the children lined the mantelpiece alongside the original portrait of Mary. "You've certainly made yourself at home," Catherine observed, her tone suggesting this wasn't necessarily a compliment. Lucy and Daniel came running in from the garden, their faces dirty and their clothes stained with soil. They stopped short when they saw the stranger in their parlor. "Children, this is your Aunt Catherine," Sarah said gently. "She was your Mama Mary's sister." Lucy's eyes grew wide. She had heard stories about her mother's sister, but had never met her. "You look just like Mama in the picture," she whispered. Catherine's expression softened slightly as she studied Lucy. "You've grown so much, darling. You were just a baby when I left. Are you here to visit us?" Daniel asked with the directness of a 5-year-old. "In a way," Catherine replied, her eyes moving meaningfully to Sarah. When Thomas returned for lunch, his face went through a range of emotions upon seeing Catherine. Surprise, wariness, and something that might have been old pain flickered across his features before he composed himself. "Catherine," he said simply, "this is unexpected." "Hello, Thomas. You're looking well." Catherine's gaze moved deliberately to Sarah and the children. Very well indeed. During lunch, Catherine regaled them with stories of her life in San Francisco. She had married a wealthy businessman and lived in a mansion on Nob Hill. She spoke of theater performances, elaborate dinner parties, and trips to Europe. It was a world away from the simple ranch life in Montana. "It's so quiet here," Catherine commented as they finished eating. "Don't you ever miss civilization, Thomas? The opportunities that city life could offer your children?" Thomas's jaw tightened slightly. "I've found everything I need right here." After lunch, when the children had gone outside to play, Catherine finally revealed the true purpose of her visit. "Thomas, I've come to talk to you about Lucy," she said, settling herself in the parlor as if preparing for a serious discussion. "My husband and I have been unable to have children, and we'd like to offer Lucy opportunities that she simply can't have here." Sarah felt her blood turn cold. "What kind of opportunities?" she asked carefully. "The best schools, music lessons, art instruction, exposure to culture and society," Catherine listed. "In San Francisco, Lucy could become a proper young lady with prospects for an advantageous marriage. Here, she'll grow up to be nothing more than a ranch wife." "There's nothing wrong with being a ranch wife," Sarah said firmly, her protective instincts flaring. Catherine's smile was patronizing. "Of course not, dear. But Lucy is Mary's daughter. She deserves better than this isolated existence." Thomas had remained silent during this exchange, but Sarah could see the storm brewing in his eyes. "Lucy belongs here," he said quietly, "with her family. But think of what we could give her," Catherine pressed. "Private tutors, finishing school, a substantial inheritance when my husband and I pass away. We could legally adopt her and provide for her future in ways that you simply can't on a ranch." "She already has a mother," Thomas said, his voice low and dangerous. "Sarah has raised her since she was 5 years old." Catherine's mask of politeness slipped. "Sarah is not her mother. I am Mary's sister, Lucy's blood relative. I have a stronger claim than some replacement bride who happened to answer your advertisement." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Despite all the years of love and devotion, all the nights she had sat up with sick children, and all the daily acts of motherhood, Catherine saw her as nothing more than a hired caretaker. Before anyone could respond, Lucy herself appeared in the doorway. She had obviously been listening from the hall, and her young face was pale with fear and confusion. "Papa," she said in a small voice, "are you going to send me away?" Thomas was across the room in an instant, kneeling down to gather Lucy in his arms. "Never," he said fiercely. "No one is taking you anywhere, sweetheart." Lucy looked over her father's shoulder at Sarah with eyes full of tears. "Mama Sarah, do you want me to go?" Sarah felt her own tears threatening to spill over. "Oh, my darling girl. Of course not. You're my daughter, and nothing could ever change that." Catherine watched this display with obvious frustration. "Lucy, wouldn't you like to see the big city? To have beautiful dresses and go to fancy parties?" Lucy pulled away from her father and looked at her aunt seriously. "Would you be there?" "Yes, darling. You'd live with Uncle Robert and me in our beautiful house." "But what about Papa? And Mama Sarah? And Daniel and Emma and baby Rebecca?" "Well, you'd visit them sometimes, of course." Lucy shook her head firmly. "No, thank you. I want to stay with my family." "But, Lucy, think of all the wonderful things you could have. I already have everything I want." Lucy interrupted with the absolute certainty that only a child could possess. "I have the best papa in the world, and the best mama too. I have little brothers and sisters to take care of, and horses to ride, and cookies to make with Mama Sarah. Why would I want to leave all that for fancy dresses?" Catherine's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You don't understand what you're giving up." "I understand perfectly," Lucy said, moving to stand between Thomas and Sarah. "You want to take me away from my family because you're sad you don't have any children. But I can't fix that for you. I already belong somewhere." The simple wisdom of the 10-year-old's words hung in the air like a challenge. Catherine looked around the room at the united family before her, and for the first time seemed to realize that her mission was hopeless. "This is ridiculous," she said, standing abruptly. "Thomas, you're being selfish. You're denying that child opportunities that Mary would have wanted for her." Thomas stood as well, his hand on Lucy's shoulder. "Mary loved this ranch. She loved the life we were building here. She wouldn't have wanted Lucy taken from her home and family. You can't know what Mary would have wanted, Catherine snapped. Actually, I do know, Thomas said quietly. Mary made me promise, before she died, that if anything ever happened to her, I would make sure Lucy grew up surrounded by love and security. She said that was more important than money or social position. Sarah has given Lucy everything Mary wanted for her. Sarah watched this confrontation with her heart pounding. She knew that legally, Catherine might have some claim as a blood relative, especially with her wealth and social connections. The thought of losing Lucy was almost unbearable. But Lucy herself had made the choice clear. This wise, brave little girl who had grown up with such grace and confidence knew exactly where she belonged. The bonds of love and daily care had proven stronger than blood or obligation. Catherine gathered her things in angry silence. At the door, she turned back one more time. This isn't over, Thomas. That child deserves better than this primitive existence. That child, Sarah spoke up for the first time since Lucy had entered the room, deserves to be loved and cherished exactly as she is, not turned into someone else's idea of what she should be. She has that here. After Catherine's carriage disappeared down the road, the family gathered in the parlor. Lucy climbed into Sarah's lap despite being almost too big for such comfort, and Thomas wrapped his arms around both of them. Were you scared? Sarah asked gently, stroking Lucy's hair. A little, Lucy admitted. But then, I remembered what you told me about love being like candle flames. Aunt Catherine doesn't have any children to light her candles, so she wanted to take one of ours. But our family has so much light already. Thomas looked at his wife with an expression of pure love and gratitude. You've given her wisdom along with everything else, he murmured. That evening, after the younger children were in bed, Lucy asked to have a serious conversation with her parents. They sat together on the front porch as they had so many times before, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. I want to tell you something, Lucy said solemnly. When Aunt Catherine first came today, part of me was curious about the fancy life she described. It sounded exciting and glamorous. Sarah felt her stomach clench, but she waited for Lucy to continue. But then, I started thinking about what that life would really mean. It would mean leaving you and Papa. It would mean not being here when Daniel learns to read or when Emma takes her first steps. It would mean missing baby Rebecca growing up. It would mean not helping Mama Sarah in the garden or learning to can peaches or any of the things that make life special. Lucy paused, looking out at the ranch that had always been her home. Aunt Catherine is wrong about you not being my real mother, she continued, looking directly at Sarah. You've been my real mother since the day you arrived. You're the one who taught me to braid my hair and helped me with my lessons. You're the one who sat up with me when I had nightmares and who makes my favorite soup when I'm sick. Being born to someone doesn't make them your real parent. Loving someone every day does. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she pulled Lucy closer. You are the greatest gift I've ever received, she whispered. Being your mother has been the greatest privilege of my life. Thomas cleared his throat roughly. I'm proud of you, Lucy girl. You showed real courage today, standing up for our family. I learned it from watching you, and Mama Sarah, Lucy replied simply. Later that night, as Sarah and Thomas prepared for bed, they reflected on the day's events and what they meant for their family's future. Do you think Catherine will try to cause legal trouble? Sarah asked worriedly. Thomas considered the question seriously. She might try, but she'd have a hard time proving that Lucy would be better off taken from a loving home and family. Judge Henderson has seen how well Lucy is doing, how happy and healthy she is. And Lucy made her own feelings pretty clear today. She was remarkable, Sarah said with pride. So wise and brave for such a young girl. She learned that from you, Thomas said, pulling Sarah into his arms. You've given her the confidence to know her own mind and the security to stand up for what she believes in. As they settled into bed, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had come to Cedar Ridge as a replacement for her sister, a substitute bride for a man who needed help raising his daughter. But over the years, she had become irreplaceable in the lives of her husband and children. The visit from Catherine had been frightening, but it had also served to highlight how strong their family bonds had become. Lucy's unhesitating choice to stay with them proved that love and daily devotion were indeed more powerful than blood or wealth. 6 months later, a letter arrived from San Francisco announcing that Catherine and her husband had adopted an orphaned infant. Sarah felt genuinely happy for them, hoping that having their own child would help Catherine understand why her attempt to take Lucy had been so misguided. Lucy herself had grown even more confident and mature since the confrontation with her aunt. She helped Sarah with the younger children, excelled in her studies with the local teacher, and had begun learning to manage some of the household accounts. At 10 years old, she was already showing signs of the remarkable woman she would become. One evening as harvest time approached, Lucy made an announcement that filled Sarah's heart with pride and joy. "I've been thinking about what I want to do when I grow up," she said as the family gathered for dinner. "Oh," Thomas prompted with interest. "I want to be a teacher like Mama Sarah was, but I want to teach here in Cedar Ridge. And someday, I want to have a ranch and a family just like ours. I want to show my children how to make snickerdoodles and how to pick wildflowers for Grandma Mary's grave." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze Lucy's hand. "That sounds like a wonderful plan, sweetheart. Will you teach me everything I need to know?" Lucy asked seriously. "Every single thing," Sarah promised. As the seasons continued to change and their children continued to grow, Sarah often thought about that first day when Lucy had looked up at her with disappointment and confusion, expecting Emma, but finding a stranger instead. Now, years later, Lucy would sometimes joke that getting Sarah instead of Emma was the best mix-up that ever happened. God knew what he was doing, Lucy would say with the wisdom of a child who had grown up surrounded by love. He sent exactly the right mama at exactly the right time. And Sarah, looking around at the family she had never expected to have, in the home she had never imagined living in, with the husband she had never thought to love, could only agree. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories began not with romance, but with simple faith and the willingness to step into an unknown future with an open heart. The little girl who had once said, "God sent you after all," had been more right than she could have possibly known. God had indeed sent Sarah to the Hartwell family, not as a replacement for what they had lost, but as exactly what they needed to become complete. And, in the process, Sarah had found her own completeness too, not as a substitute for someone else's life, but as the author of a beautiful story that was entirely her own. The first months of marriage brought challenges that Sarah had never anticipated. Being a wife was different from being a sister or a teacher. She had to learn Thomas's routines, his preferences, and his moods while also establishing her own place in the household. Some days felt natural and easy, while others left her questioning whether she had made the right choice. Thomas was a good man, but he was also set in his ways after years of managing alone. He had specific ideas about how things should be done on the ranch, and sometimes Sarah's suggestions were met with polite but firm resistance. She wanted to expand the vegetable garden, but Thomas worried about the water supply. She thought they should get more chickens for extra income, but Thomas believed the current flock was sufficient. Lucy, meanwhile, was testing the boundaries of their new relationship. The honeymoon period of cookie baking and flower picking gave way to the reality of daily discipline and routine. The little girl had grown accustomed to having her father's full attention when he wasn't working, and she wasn't always happy to share him with a new wife. One particularly difficult morning in November, Lucy refused to get dressed for school and threw a tantrum that left Sarah feeling helpless and frustrated. When Thomas came in from the barn to find Lucy screaming and Sarah near tears, he took charge with the firm but gentle authority of an experienced father. "Lucy Marie Hartwell," he said in a voice that cut through the chaos. "This behavior is unacceptable. You will apologize to Sarah right now, and then you will get dressed for school." Lucy's tears stopped immediately. She looked between her father and stepmother, realizing she had crossed a line. "I'm sorry, Mama Sarah," she whispered. After Lucy was dressed and eating breakfast, Thomas pulled Sarah aside. "She's testing you," he explained quietly. "Mary used to say that children push hardest against the people they trust most, because they know those people won't leave." "But what if I do something wrong?" Sarah asked. "What if I'm not good enough at this?" Thomas looked at her seriously. "Sarah, You moved your entire life to care for a child who wasn't yours and marry a man you didn't know. That takes more courage than most people have. Lucy knows that, even if she can't say it yet. The first real test of their marriage came in December when a severe winter storm trapped them all inside the house for nearly a week. The snow piled up past the windows, and the wind howled day and night. Thomas spent most of his time tending to the animals in the barn, leaving Sarah and Lucy cooped up together in the small house. By the third day, they were all getting on each other's nerves. Lucy was bored and restless, complaining about everything from the food to the games they played. Sarah felt the walls closing in, missing her quiet life as a schoolteacher where she had her own space and routine. The breaking point came when Lucy accidentally knocked over a pot of soup that Sarah had spent hours making. The hot liquid splashed across the kitchen floor, and Lucy burst into tears of frustration and guilt. Sarah's first instinct was to snap at the child, but something in Lucy's frightened expression stopped her. Instead, Sarah knelt down and pulled Lucy into a hug. "It's all right, sweetheart. Accidents happen. We'll clean it up together and make something else for dinner." "I didn't mean to." Lucy sobbed against Sarah's shoulder. "I know you didn't," Sarah said, stroking the little girl's hair. "We're all feeling cooped up in here. What do you say we build a fort out of blankets and chairs? We can have our dinner inside the fort like we're camping." Lucy's face lit up at the idea. They spent the rest of the evening creating an elaborate blanket fort in the parlor, complete with pillows for seats and candles for light. When Thomas came in from the barn, cold and exhausted, he found his wife and daughter giggling inside their makeshift shelter, sharing sandwiches and telling stories. "Is there room for one more camper?" he asked with a smile. That night, as they all huddled together in the warm fort listening to the wind outside, Sarah felt something shift in their family dynamic. They weren't just three people living in the same house anymore. They were becoming a real family, with inside jokes and shared experiences that belonged only to them. Spring brought new life to the ranch and new challenges to their marriage. Sarah was pregnant, a development that filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had always assumed she would have children someday, but the reality of carrying Thomas's child while still figuring out how to be Lucy's mother felt overwhelming. Thomas was thrilled about the baby, his face lighting up when Sarah told him the news. But she could also see the worry in his eyes. Losing Mary during childbirth had left scars that might never fully heal. "I want this baby," Sarah assured him one evening as they sat on the porch watching Lucy chase fireflies. "I want your baby. But I need you to believe that everything will be all right." Thomas took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I lost Mary, and it nearly destroyed me. I can't lose you too." "You won't," Sarah said firmly. "We're going to be fine. All of us." Lucy was initially excited about becoming a big sister, but as Sarah's pregnancy progressed and she had less energy for their usual activities, the little girl began to feel left out. Sarah found herself caught between caring for Lucy's emotional needs and dealing with her own physical discomfort. The situation came to a head one afternoon when Sarah was feeling particularly sick and asked Lucy to play quietly while she rested. Lucy, frustrated by weeks of being asked to be patient and understanding, finally exploded. "I hate this baby," she shouted. "I want things to go back to the way they were before. You don't love me anymore." Sarah's heart broke at the pain in Lucy's voice. Despite feeling nauseous and exhausted, she patted the bed beside her. "Come here, sweetheart. We need to talk." Lucy climbed onto the bed reluctantly, her face streaked with tears. Sarah wrapped her arms around the little girl and held her close. "Do you remember when your papa married me?" Sarah asked gently. Lucy nodded against her chest. "Were you worried that he might love me more than you?" "Maybe a little," Lucy admitted quietly. "But that didn't happen, did it? Your papa's love for you didn't get smaller when I came along. It's the same with this baby. My love for you isn't going to shrink or disappear. Love isn't like a pie that gets smaller when you share it. Love is more like a candle flame that can light other candles without getting dimmer itself." Lucy was quiet for a long moment, thinking about this. "So you'll still be my mama even when the baby comes?" "I'll always be your mama," Sarah promised. "You were my first baby, even before this one in my tummy. That makes you special in a way that nobody else can ever be." From that day forward, Lucy threw herself into preparing for the baby with enthusiasm. She helped Sarah set up the nursery, picked out tiny clothes at the general store, and practiced being gentle with her doll so she would know how to hold her new sibling. Thomas watched all of this with growing amazement. Sarah had somehow managed to help Lucy feel included rather than replaced, turning a potentially jealous big sister into an excited helper. Her patience and wisdom with his daughter made him fall a little more in love with his wife each day. The baby arrived on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Sarah had first stepped off the train in Cedar Ridge. Dr. Henderson pronounced both mother and child healthy, and Thomas wept with relief as he held his son for the first time. Lucy was beside herself with excitement when she met her baby brother. "He's so tiny," she whispered in awe. "Can I help feed him? Can I help give him baths? What's his name going to be?" Sarah and Thomas had discussed names for months, but looking at their son's peaceful face, they both knew immediately what to call him. "His name is Daniel," Sarah said softly. "Daniel Thomas Hartwell." "That's a good, strong name," Lucy declared with satisfaction. The first few months with baby Daniel were exhausting, but wonderful. Sarah marveled at how naturally motherhood came to her, both with the newborn and with Lucy, who had blossomed into a helpful and loving big sister. Thomas proved to be a devoted father to both children, and Sarah often caught him looking at their family with an expression of quiet contentment. One evening in December, as they sat by the fire with Daniel sleeping in Sarah's arms, and Lucy curled up against Thomas's side, Lucy made an observation that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Mama Sarah," Lucy said drowsily, "I'm glad Miss Emma got sick." Sarah's breath caught. "Why, sweetheart?" "Because if she didn't get sick, you wouldn't have come to be our mama. And then Daniel wouldn't be here, and we wouldn't be a real family." Thomas met Sarah's eyes across the room, and she saw her own thoughts reflected there. What had started as a practical arrangement born of necessity had grown into something neither of them had expected. They had built a genuine family based on mutual respect, shared responsibilities, and growing affection. "God has a plan for everything," Sarah said gently. "Sometimes his plans are different from our plans, but they always work out for the best." "Do you think my real mama knows about Daniel?" Lucy asked. "I think she does," Sarah replied. "And I think she's very happy that you have a baby brother to love and protect." As winter settled over the ranch again, Sarah reflected on the incredible year she had experienced. She had arrived in Cedar Ridge as a frightened young woman stepping into her sister's shoes. Now she was a wife, a mother to 2 children, and an integral part of the community. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been built day by day through small acts of kindness, moments of understanding, and the gradual weaving together of 3 separate lives into one family story. There had been difficult days and moments of doubt, but there had also been laughter, love, and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful together. Thomas had changed too. The grieving widower Sarah had first met had slowly emerged from his shell of sadness. He smiled more often now, laughed at Lucy's silly jokes, and seemed to find joy in the everyday moments of family life. The careful distance he had maintained at the beginning of their marriage had given way to genuine partnership and growing intimacy. One snowy evening, as they prepared for bed after a particularly busy day, Thomas pulled Sarah into his arms and held her close. "I never thought I'd say this," he murmured against her hair, "but I'm grateful for the circumstances that brought you to us. I can't imagine our lives without you now." Sarah felt her heart swell with happiness. "Even though I'm not who you were expecting, especially because of that," Thomas said, pulling back to look into her eyes. "You're exactly who we needed, Sarah. You're exactly who God meant for us to have." As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, she thought about the mysterious ways that life could unfold. A year ago, she had been a spinster schoolteacher with no prospects for marriage or family. Now she was surrounded by love, purpose, and the sweet chaos of daily family life. Sometimes the best blessings came disguised as disappointments. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories began not with passion, but with simple kindness and the willingness to try. And sometimes, Sarah thought with a smile, God's greatest gifts arrived exactly when they were needed most, even if they came in completely unexpected packages. Sarah Mitchell stood at the train station in Denver, clutching her worn leather suitcase with trembling hands. The telegram in her coat pocket had changed everything 3 days ago. Her sister Emma was supposed to be the one making this journey to marry rancher Thomas Hartwell in the small town of Cedar Ridge, Montana. But Emma had fallen seriously ill with pneumonia just 2 weeks before the wedding. The arrangement had been made through letters over 6 months. Emma needed a husband after their father died, leaving debts that threatened to take their family farm. Thomas needed a wife to help care for his 5-year-old daughter Lucy after his first wife died in childbirth. It seemed like the perfect solution for both families. Now Sarah found herself stepping into her sister's shoes, literally wearing Emma's traveling dress that hung loose on her smaller frame. At 23, Sarah had always been the quiet sister, the one who preferred books to social gatherings. She taught at the local schoolhouse and had never seriously considered marriage. But when Emma begged her with tears in her eyes, Sarah couldn't refuse. The train whistle blew, and Sarah climbed aboard with her heart pounding. She had exchanged only 2 brief letters with Thomas, explaining the situation. His response had been short, but not unkind. "A good woman is what my daughter needs. If you're willing to try, so am I." The journey took 2 days, with Sarah barely sleeping as she wondered what awaited her. She had seen one photograph of Thomas, a tall, serious-looking man with kind eyes standing next to a beautiful woman holding a baby. That woman was gone now, and Sarah would somehow need to fill that impossible space. When the train finally pulled into Cedar Ridge, Sarah's stomach felt like it was full of butterflies. The small station was nearly empty except for a few cowboys and an older woman with a basket. Sarah stepped onto the platform, looking around nervously. "Miss Emma Mitchell," a deep voice called. Sarah turned to see Thomas Hartwell walking toward her. He was taller than she had expected, with sandy brown hair and weathered hands that spoke of years of hard work. His eyes were the same kind ones from the photograph, but there were new lines around them that told of grief and worry. "Actually, I'm Sarah Mitchell," she said softly. "Emma's sister. I wrote to you about the change." Thomas stopped and studied her face carefully. Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm under his gaze. She was shorter than Emma, with darker hair and green eyes instead of blue. Where Emma was outgoing and confident, Sarah felt small and uncertain. "You came," Thomas said finally, and there was surprise in his voice. "I gave my word," Sarah replied, lifting her chin slightly. Thomas nodded and reached for her suitcase. "Lucy's at the schoolhouse. I thought we'd pick her up together, if that's all right with you." As they walked through the dusty streets of Cedar Ridge, Thomas pointed out the general store, the church, and the doctor's office. The town was smaller than Sarah had expected, with maybe 200 people. Everyone they passed stared curiously at the new woman walking beside their local rancher. "Lucy doesn't know about the change," Thomas said as they approached a small white building with children's voices coming from inside. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come." Sarah's heart sank. The little girl was expecting her Aunt Emma, who had written her several letters filled with promises and excitement about their new life together. Now she would meet a complete stranger instead. The school bell rang, and children began pouring out of the building. Sarah spotted Lucy immediately. She had her father's eyes and her mother's delicate features, with blonde curls that caught the afternoon sunlight. The little girl looked around eagerly until she saw her father. "Papa." Lucy ran toward them, then stopped suddenly when she noticed Sarah. Her bright smile faded to confusion. "Lucy, this is Miss Sarah Mitchell," Thomas said gently, kneeling down to his daughter's level. "She's Emma's sister. She's going to be staying with us." Lucy's lower lip began to tremble. "Where's Miss Emma? She promised she was coming to be my new mama." Sarah felt her heart breaking for this little girl who had already lost so much. She knelt down beside Thomas, making herself the same height as Lucy. "Miss Emma got very sick," Sarah explained softly. "She wanted so badly to come, but the doctor said she needed to stay in bed to get better. She asked me to come instead, and she sent all her love with me." Lucy's eyes filled with tears, but she promised. She said we'd bake cookies together, and she'd teach me to knit like my real mama used to do. "I can do those things too," Sarah offered quietly. "I love to bake, and I know how to knit. Would you like to try some cookies when we get home?" Lucy looked between Sarah and her father uncertainly. Sarah could see the war going on in the child's mind, the disappointment of broken promises fighting against the hope of new possibilities. "Do you know how to make snickerdoodles?" Lucy asked finally. Sarah smiled, her first real smile since arriving in Cedar Ridge. "They happen to be my specialty." The walk to the ranch took 20 minutes, with Lucy skipping ahead and then running back to ask Sarah questions. What was her favorite color? Did she like horses? Could she really make snickerdoodles? Sarah answered each question patiently, feeling some of the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. The Hartwell Ranch was larger than Sarah had expected, with a two-story farmhouse painted white with blue shutters. There were several outbuildings, including a large barn and what looked like a chicken coop. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Sarah could see why Thomas needed help managing everything while raising a young daughter alone. "This was Mary's garden," Thomas said as they passed a patch of overgrown vegetables and flowers. "I haven't had much time to keep it up." Sarah noticed the sadness in his voice when he mentioned his first wife's name. She wondered if he would ever be able to speak of a second wife with the same tenderness. Inside the house, Sarah was struck by how clean everything was, though it clearly lacked a woman's touch. The furniture was practical but sparse, and there were no curtains on the windows or flowers on the tables. A large photograph of a beautiful woman holding baby Lucy sat prominently on the mantelpiece. "That's my real mama," Lucy said, following Sarah's gaze. "Papa says she watches over me from heaven." "She was very beautiful," Sarah said sincerely. "You look just like her." Lucy beamed with pride, and Sarah felt a small connection forming between them. That evening, as promised, Sarah made snickerdoodles while Lucy watched from a chair pulled up to the kitchen counter. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, pretending to read his newspaper, but really watching the two of them interact. Sarah showed Lucy how to roll the cookie dough in cinnamon and sugar, letting the little girl help with each step. "These taste just like the ones Miss Emma said she'd make," Lucy declared after taking her first bite of the warm cookies. "That's because we learned from the same grandmother," Sarah explained. "Our grandma Rose taught both Emma and me her secret recipe." "Will you teach me the secret too?" Lucy asked with wide eyes. "Someday, when you're a little older," Sarah promised. As Lucy headed upstairs for her bath, Thomas remained at the kitchen table. Sarah busied herself cleaning up the baking supplies, unsure of what to say to this man who was supposed to become her husband in just 3 days. "She likes you," Thomas said finally. Sarah turned from the sink, drying her hands on her apron. "She's a wonderful child. Emma was right about that in her letters." "What about you?" Thomas asked quietly. "Are you having second thoughts about all this?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Everything about this situation felt overwhelming and strange. But looking at Lucy's happy face covered in cinnamon and sugar, and seeing the relief in Thomas's eyes when his daughter smiled, Sarah realized something important. "No," she said firmly. "I think I'm exactly where I need to be." That night, Sarah lay in the guest bedroom that would soon become hers as Thomas's wife. She could hear Lucy talking to herself in the next room, probably playing with her dolls and telling them about the cookie-making adventure. Through the thin walls, she could also hear Thomas moving around his room, preparing for bed. In 3 days, they would stand before the preacher and promise to love and honor each other. They were essentially strangers, bound together by necessity and hope rather than romance. But as Sarah drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking that sometimes the best foundations were built on practical needs and genuine care rather than passionate feelings that might fade with time. The next morning brought new challenges. Lucy woke up cranky and missing her routine with Emma's letters. She had been looking forward to specific activities that Emma had promised, and Sarah felt the weight of those unfulfilled expectations. "Miss Emma said she'd take me to pick wildflowers for my real mama's grave," Lucy said sadly over breakfast. Sarah looked to Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. "We could do that today if you'd like," Sarah offered. "I'd be honored to visit your mama with you." The cemetery sat on a small hill overlooking the valley, surrounded by a white picket fence. Mary Hartwell's grave was marked with a simple stone that read, "Beloved wife and mother." Someone had planted roses nearby, though they needed tending. Lucy knelt down and carefully arranged the wildflowers they had picked. "Mama, this is Miss Sarah. She makes snickerdoodles almost as good as Grandma Rose used to." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the little girl's simple introduction. She knelt beside Lucy and placed her own small bouquet on the grave. "I promise I'll take good care of her," Sarah whispered. When they returned to the ranch, Sarah threw herself into the work that needed doing. She weeded Mary's garden, finding vegetables that could still be salvaged and planning what to plant for next season. She mended curtains she found stored in a chest and hung them in the kitchen and parlor. She organized Lucy's clothes and toys, creating a better system for the busy little girl. Thomas watched all of this with growing amazement. Sarah worked quietly and efficiently, never complaining about the enormous task of making a home in a strange place with people she barely knew. She seemed to understand instinctively what was needed without being asked. On her second evening at the ranch, Sarah was reading to Lucy when the little girl suddenly looked up from her book. "Miss Sarah, are you going to marry my papa?" Sarah's cheeks grew warm. "Yes, if that's all right with you." Lucy considered this seriously. "Will you stay forever?" "My real mama couldn't stay. I'll stay as long as you and your papa want me here," Sarah promised. "Forever then," Lucy said decisively, snuggling closer to Sarah's side. That night, Thomas found Sarah sitting on the front porch, looking up at the stars. He sat down beside her on the wooden steps, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. Sarah smiled slightly. "I was just thinking how different this all is from what I expected my life would be." "Good different or bad different?" "Different different," Sarah said, making Thomas chuckle. "I never imagined I'd be sitting on a ranch in Montana, about to marry a man I just met, and help raise a little girl who's already stolen my heart." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Mary and we had what you might call a love match. Met at a dance when we were 17 and knew right away we wanted to spend our lives together. When she died, I thought that was it for me. Love like that doesn't come twice." Sarah felt a pang at his words, but also understanding. "I'm not trying to replace her," she said softly. "I know," Thomas replied. "And that's what makes this work. You're not trying to be Mary. You're just trying to be yourself. And that's enough. More than enough." On the morning of their wedding day, Sarah woke before dawn with butterflies dancing in her stomach. Lucy crept into her room just as the sun was rising, carrying a small box. "I have something for you," Lucy whispered, climbing onto the bed. She opened the box to reveal a simple pearl necklace. "This was my real mama's. Papa said I could give it to you if I wanted to." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Lucy, this is too precious. This should be saved for you when you're older. Mama would want you to have it," Lucy said with the certainty that only children possess. "She'd want you to feel beautiful today." As Sarah let Lucy fasten the necklace around her neck, she realized that this little girl had just given her the greatest wedding gift possible: acceptance and love freely offered. The wedding ceremony took place in the small church with most of the town in attendance. Sarah wore Emma's traveling dress, now altered to fit her properly, with Mary's pearl necklace at her throat. Thomas wore his best suit and looked nervous but determined. When Preacher Williams asked if they promised to love and cherish each other, Sarah and Thomas looked into each other's eyes and spoke their vows with quiet sincerity. They were promising to try to build something good together, to put Lucy's needs first and see where that foundation might lead them. As Thomas kissed his new bride gently on the cheek, Lucy clapped her hands with delight. "Now you're really my mama," she declared loudly enough for the whole congregation to hear. Walking out of the church as husband and wife, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders along with a strange sense of rightness. This wasn't the romantic love story she had read about in books, but it was real and honest and full of possibility.